Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Saints Conference. I'm Sam Guzman, the author of the book, The Catholic Gentleman, Living Authentic Manhood Today, and the editor of the Catholic Gentleman blog, a blog for Catholic men. Today, I want to talk to you about a saint who is dear to my heart, a saint who I love a great deal, and his name is Blessed Charles de Foucauld. So I want to begin by giving you a little brief biography of Blessed Charles, and then we're going to talk about three takeaways from his life that we can all put into practice in our own lives and in our own context. So first of all, who was Blessed Charles de Foucauld, otherwise known as Brother Charles of Jesus? He was born in Strasbourg, France in 1858, and he was orphaned at a very young age, the age of 6, and he and his sister were raised by their grandfather, who was a military man. And Blessed Charles initially lost his faith as a adolescent, and he joined the military, following in his grandfather's footsteps. But he's quite a profligate. He quickly developed a reputation for womanizing, for drinking, for getting in fights, and so everyone would say, "Hey, look out! Here comes Charles. He's kind of a wild man. Let's stay out of his way." But paradoxically, when Blessed Charles was in France, I'm sorry, Morocco, a Muslim country, he was stationed there as part of the French occupation of Morocco in that time. He was blown away by the witness and devotion of the Muslims who lived in Morocco. They were so devout, so dedicated to their faith, never missed prayers. The faith of Islam permeated the culture of Morocco. And that woke Charles to the reality of God. He said, if God is real, and these Muslims seem to think that he is, I mean, they've radically devoted their lives to him, then I want to know him too. And so he began praying, "My God, if you exist, let me come to know you." So Charles returned to France, was welcomed with open arms by his family despite his wild life. And he quickly sought out a Catholic priest and said, "Give me guidance. I need to know if God is real." And so a priest, Father Houvelin, led Blessed Charles back to God when he was 28 years old. And this began a moment of radical transformation for Charles, because he said, as soon as I believed in God, I understood that I could do nothing else than to live for him alone. So Blessed Charles dedicated his life to the radical pursuit of knowledge of God in a similar way to the Muslims that he had witnessed in Morocco. He's like, I'm going to go all in and I'm going to find God and follow Christ with my whole life. So he spent 7 years as a Trappist monk, first in France and then in Syria. But he wrote to his spiritual director, "This life isn't radical enough for me. It's not poor enough. It's not simple enough. It's not Christ-like enough." Now, keep in mind, the Trappists were one of the most radically strict orders in the church at that time. They considered themselves Benedictines of the strict observance. They were extremely rigorous by today's standards. And yet, Blessed Charles says, it's not enough. I want to follow Christ even more. So he ended up leaving the Trappist order and going to Nazareth and saying, I'm going to live the hidden life of Christ after him as radically as possible. So he joined some poor Clares in Nazareth and said, I'm going to be your errand boy. I'm going to sweep out the stalls. I'm going to do the most humble and menial tasks in imitation of Christ, because I want to follow him as closely as possible, especially the 30 years of his hidden life before he began his public ministry. That's the life I want to live. So that's what he did. And for 7 years, not for 7 years, but for several years, he began his hidden, humble life among the poor Clares in the birthplace, the home of Jesus in Nazareth. But Blessed Charles wanted to continue following Christ in a more radical way. So after several years with these poor Clares in Nazareth, he was ordained a priest at the age of 43. And he said, where is the most humble, the most forgotten, most abandoned place on earth? the last place that anyone would ever want to go. That's where I want to go. And so he left for the Saharan desert. First, he lived in a place called Beni Abbas, and later he moved to Tamanrasset, if I'm saying that properly, among the roving nomads of the Tuareg people. And it's an incredibly harsh life. The Saharan Desert, if you know anything about it, is one of the least hospitable places on earth. And the Tuareg had lived there for a long time and had learned how to scrap out an existence there in this incredibly desolate place. But Blessed Charles went and lived among them. And he said, I want to cry by my life, by my deeds, the goodness of Jesus Christ. And I want to tell these people by my actions and by my goodness, I want to radiate the goodness of Christ. And I want these people to say, if this man is so good, what is his master like? What is his Lord like? And by my life and by my deeds, I want to draw people to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now, Blessed Charles, his initial vision was, I want a religious order. I want an order of people who follow me in my example and in my radical devotion to Christ and the poverty and the simplicity and the humility of Christ. Let's create a missionary order. For Charles, he never saw that vision fulfilled. Not a single person came to join him. He also, as far as we know, didn't make a single convert. He faced a ton of skepticism, a ton of hostility from the Tuareg people initially. However, in time, through his love and service and genuine kindness to them, he won them over. They ended up learning to love him. He said, I want to be the universal brother. I want to be the brother of these people. I want to share their life with them, all their hardships, all their suffering, all their sorrows, as well as their joys. That's exactly what he did. So he won the Tuareg people over, but again, we don't know if he ever made a convert, and we don't think that he did. But he certainly didn't found the religious order that he dreamed of, at least in his lifetime. Now, in God's providence, Blessed Charles has seen fruit of his labors and of his life, because there are now little brothers of Jesus and little sisters of Jesus all over the world, people who discovered Blessed Charles after his death and said, I want to live that life. So there are now missionaries all over the world who are following in Blessed Charles' example. Now, one more thing to know about Blessed Charles was that he had a desire for martyrdom. Christ laid down his life for the world. Well, Blessed Charles wanted to do so as well. Now, of course, if you have a desire to be a martyr, you can't go looking for opportunities to be martyred. That's not holy. That's not good. But nevertheless, in 1916, Blessed Charles' desire was fulfilled, and he imitated Christ not only in his life of radical simplicity and humility and love, but also by his martyrdom. And he was killed by a band of roving marauders who raided his little hut, surrounded it, and he was killed in the fray. But he had spent years preparing for this moment, and throughout his writings, throughout his journals, throughout his letters to his spiritual director, he said, I want to be ready for martyrdom on a moment's notice. Now, again, Charles was surrounded by Muslims. Muslims and Christians had been at war for centuries at this point, and there was a lot of hostility to his Christian witness. So he knew that this was a strong possibility that he was going to be martyred at some point. And again, he was in 1916. But he was discovered by the military several days later and dead in his hut. But word began to spread about this holy man. And before long, he was beatified. But his witness has spread throughout the world. Again, he, from an objective standpoint, from a world standpoint, he was a complete failure in his lifetime. Didn't make a single convert, didn't recruit anyone to his way of life, and yet profound witness that has spread throughout the world. So what are 3 lessons we can take away from Blessed Charles? Just briefly, I want to share 3 things with you. First of all, make goodness attractive. When we look at spreading the Catholic faith, we often start with the intellect. We often start with the points of the catechism or the teachings of the faith or the dogmas of the faith. And that's not wrong, but looking at the world today, it's torn apart by division, by warring factions. People are lonely, people are hurt, people are desperately angry. And we have an opportunity to make goodness attractive by our radiant love, by our participation in the goodness and humility and service of Christ, we can make people say, if that person is so good, if Sam is so good, if whoever is listening to this video is so good, who is their master? I want to know more about him. I want to be like him. Because if so-and-so is so good, then Christ must be wonderful. So we have the opportunity to not only preach the truth, but by our lives, by our example, let people be drawn to not what we say, but who we are. And that's a profoundly beautiful opportunity. Next, we need to learn to serve others simply and quietly and humbly. Blessed Charles wasn't so much interested in achieving some statistical goals of conversions. He was there to serve. And like Jesus Christ said, I have come not to condemn the world, but that the world through me might be saved in John 3:17. And he came to lay down his life for many. Well, Blessed Charles lived that example through his radical service and through his radical love. He healed the sick, and he served the poor of the Tuareg people. And again, he shared all their sorrows, all their joys, and became a brother to them. We have that opportunity as well. I think about our world, and there's so much hostility. And if there's not hostility, there's at least a dehumanizing lack of concern for others. So show kindness, spread goodness, serve others. People will stand up and notice. They'll say, who is this person? Why does he care about me? I've never met him before, or never met her before. But acts of kindness, acts of generosity, acts of selfless love in our world will be noticed because, again, there's just so much hostility. So next time you're at the grocery store checking out, look that person in the eye. Perhaps use their name. Treat them like a human being. It's so rare in our world today. And as Catholics, again, we have an opportunity to spread goodness and make goodness attractive by our life and by our service. And finally, be prepared to witness to the reality of Christ by your life and by your death. So many people are terrified of death today. So many people are terrified of living today. They live their life afraid, desiring to be safe. And what we have an opportunity to do as Catholics is bear witness to a higher order. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom is in eternity. And are our eyes set on eternity, like Blessed Charles? Are we prepared? We may never be martyrs, but are we prepared to witness by a good and holy death, by a death filled with love and expectation for eternity, being united with Christ? Are we terrified of suffering, or are we willing to embrace it, to follow Christ and to offer it up and to be witnesses to the love of God, a love that transcends death, a love that transcends suffering, the love of the cross? Are we prepared to do that? So let's examine our hearts and examine our witness. How do others perceive us? Let's think about our actions and our witness. Now, that's not in an egotistical way. We don't want to just draw attention to ourselves, but we do want to make sure that by our lives and, someday, we never know when, by our deaths, that we will bear witness to the love of Jesus Christ, a love that transcends this world, and not be afraid of death, not be afraid of suffering. And the world will wake up and say, well, wait, what does this person have that's different? We have that opportunity as Catholics. And Blessed Charles shows us how. So I would strongly encourage you to look up more about Blessed Charles. There's a wonderful new book called The Universal Brother about his life and his spirituality. There's also a great introduction in this book. It's called Charles de Foucauld, and it's a collection of his writings and his letters from Robert Ellsberg. It's part of the Modern Spiritual Masters series. Look it up. It's profoundly beautiful. Just spending a few minutes a day with Blessed Charles will transform your heart and soul. So to learn more about Blessed Charles, I've just given you a brief introduction to his life and spiritual approach today, but there's so much more to know. Look him up. You won't regret it. God bless you all.